The East-West Schism, also known as the Great Schism, marks a pivotal moment in Christian history that resulted in the permanent division between the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church. The schism, which occurred in 1054, was the culmination of centuries of theological, cultural, and political differences. The formal mutual excommunications between the Patriarch of Constantinople and the legates of the Pope in 1054 are often cited as the symbolic event that truly crystallized the split. However, the roots of the schism extend far back into history and were influenced by a complex interplay of factors. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, it's good to meet you, and if you're coming back, it's great to see you again. If you want to support the channel, you may only follow the links to the Patreon in the comments and description. Otherwise, if you feel inclined to like, comment and subscribe, that also helps quite a lot. Now, without further ado, let's begin our video for today. The East-West Schism. Let's go back all the way to the beginning. Some scholars suggest that the divergence between the East and Western churches began long before the formal excommunications. While the Photian Schism in the 9th century marks a significant point of separation, tensions between the East and the West can be traced back even further, with some pointing to events as early as the 4th century. Orthodox apologists often highlight instances from the 2nd century as evident of early claims to papal primacy by Rome and subsequent rejection by Eastern churches. Other scholars have identified several sporadic schisms within the early church, occurring under popes such as Victor I in the 2nd century, Stephen I in the 3rd century, and Damasus in the 4th century. One theory regarding the schism suggests that the transfer of the imperial capital to Rome to Constantinople in the 6th century played a role. Some have proposed that primacy in the church shifted along with the capital, a view that was later supported by Photios I of Constantinople in the 9th century. Constantinople, as the seat of the imperial ruler and symbol of worldly power, was regarded as the highest among the patriarchs, and thus claimed the right to govern them, basically akin to the authority of the emperor. Now, after the fall and destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans, the early centers of Christian learning were, of course, somewhat damaged, and the influence shifted to Antioch and Alexandria in Egypt, more stable cities. The Church of Alexandria was said to have been assisted in its founding by Mark, one of the 70 apostles, while rather Antioch attracted prominent figures like Peter, Paul, Barnabas, among others. I'm sure that if you're somewhat versed in the New Testament, these names are familiar to you. Antioch served as a base from which Paul embarked on his missionary journeys, spreading Christianity across various regions. Additionally, the Church of Antioch played a significant role in sending Peter and Paul to Rome to support the growth of the nascent Christian community there, with Peter being regarded as the first bishop In the early development of the Eastern Church, Saint Thomas is said to have traveled eastward and played a key role in establishing the Church in the Persian Empire and its neighboring kingdoms and areas. On the other hand, Saint Addai and Saint Mary, two of the 70 apostles, are credited with much of the work in Persia. The Church of the East, therefore, grew to prominence, rivaling the Mediterranean Church in size, at least at the time, the 6th to the 8th centuries, when it expanded into the Far East. Now, during the 4th century, theological debates and questions proliferated across the Roman Empire, as the emperors sought to exert control over the Church. The influence of Greek speculative thought on Christian theology led to a proliferation of divergent and, frankly, conflicting opinions among many theologians. Some, of course, influenced by politics and other things that influence religious authorities. Amidst this intellectual ferment, the fundamental commandment of Christ to love others as oneself often seemed overshadowed by more abstract and avant-garde theological debates, not quite seeing the forest for the trees, it seems. Theological disputes were not merely academic, but they were used as weapons in power struggles among bishops, as of course being labeled a heretic was a means for one bishop to depose another. Consequently, tensions arose within the Church when leaders were perceived to overstep their bounds, or when theological disagreements escalated into actual conflicts with much broader implications. The early Christian empire, if we may refer to it as such, experienced a significant shift in its politics, with politics being one of the first institutions to undergo change. By the 5th century, Western imperial power began to wane, even before the invasion of the barbarian kings. We're talking about the Visigoths, who were being pushed into the Roman Empire's territory by Hunnic incursions from the east. And by the way, around this time, don't think that the entire empire had just flicked the switch and become Christian. That was simply not the case. Many people were still holding to their old beliefs. In fact, in 410, when Rome was being sacked by the Visigoths, a lot of the bishops there thought, well, perhaps it's the old gods that are angry with us. Well, shall we perform some sacrifices, everybody? So, of course, in living memory, people were still having some old nostalgia. Now, this decline in secular authority was accompanied by a rise in the power and influence of the Pope, which was a relatively new office as well. And this resulted in a blurring of the lines between secular and ecclesiastical authority. Prior to ecumenical councils, Rome held a prominent position in Christianity, owing to its status as the capital of the Roman Empire. Of course, it's the eternal city, right? Well, while bishops from the eastern and southern Mediterranean regions recognized the persuasive leadership of the Bishop of Rome, they did not view him as infallible, nor acknowledge any judicial authority over them. The Bishop of Rome did not like this, While Rome's claim to special authority over other churches was rooted in its connection with the apostles Peter and Paul, the important ones. Despite gaining increasing recognition as a center of Christianity in the first 3 centuries, historical documents from that period do not unequivocally assert or recognize the papal primacy of Rome. Now, after Jerusalem, the Church of Rome naturally emerged as the primary center of Christianity, of course due to its early and significant Christian population. Constantine made sure of that one. The city was closely associated with the Apostle Paul, who preached there and was actually martyred there, as well as the Apostle Peter, who met a similar fate. In Orthodox liturgy, that's the Eastern Orthodox liturgy, Peter and Paul are revered as the wisest apostles and princes of the Church of Rome. Peter is traditionally regarded as the founder of the Church of Rome, and the bishops of Rome are considered his successors, a direct line of command all the way down. Now, Father Thomas Hopko, a prominent Orthodox theologian, emphasizes the special honor accorded to the Church of Rome among the earliest Christian communities. According to him, the Roman Church held a place of honor among other churches due to its foundation to the teachings and martyrdom of Peter and Paul, as well as its location in the capital city of the Roman Empire, which was still considered the center of the civilized world at the time, at least by the Romans. Ignatius, the bishop of Antioch, praised the church in Rome as worthy of God's honor and love, unconditionally of course, highlighting its role as a leader among the early Christian churches. Of course, it's the Roman Empire. Any policy change, well, they had to take the reins, didn't they? The Quartodeciman controversy in the 2nd century actually marks an early instance of tension between the Bishop of Rome and Eastern churches, particularly in the Roman provinces of Asia. And when we say Asia in terms of a Roman province, we mean Western Anatolia, a region of modern-day Turkey. Now this controversy, the Quartodeciman controversy, arose over the official date of Easter, with churches in Asia following the Jewish Passover tradition of celebrating it on the spring full moon, while others observed it on the following Sunday. Bishop Victor of Rome attempted to resolve the controversy by excommunicating churches in the Roman province of Asia, but he faced resistance from the Eastern bishop, including Polycrates of Ephesus. Well, despite Victor's efforts, and he did make great efforts to accomplish this, the Eastern churches maintained their paschal tradition, prompting Victor to reconsider his decision after the intervention of other bishops such as Irenaeus of Gaul. Perhaps an intervention was called where Victor was politely told to, as we say in Australia, pull your head in. Well, while some Catholic apologists view Victor's actions as evidence of papal primacy and authority, Orthodox apologists argue that the Eastern churches, well, they never recognized Victor's authority beyond his own city. That's a Roman idea, and we are from the Eastern Empire, so mind your own business. The rejection of Victor's decision by the Eastern bishops is cited as proof against the idea that the churches in Asia Minor accepted the primacy of the Bishop of Rome. Now, throughout the earliest of the early church history, the opinion of the Bishop of Rome was often sought in resolving disputes, especially among patriarchs in the Eastern Mediterranean. Rome's distance from the theological disputes of the Eastern Mediterranean allowed its bishop to be perceived as more impartial. However, following the sack of Rome by invading Goths in 410, Rome entered a period of decline and isolation, becoming increasingly irrelevant to the wider Mediterranean Church. It didn't help that it was almost completely just wrecked. It looked like a bomb had hit it after the Goths had went there. It took until the rise of Charlemagne and his successors that the Church of Rome regained prominence, coinciding with the military successes of Western Mediterranean adventurers and the eventual emergence of the papal states. That's another video in itself. Now, onto the First Ecumenical Council at Nicaea, convened by Emperor Constantine the Great, which played a pivotal role in shaping the organizational structure of the early Christian Church and establishing the authority of key bishoprics, or metropolitan sees. One of the significant outcomes of the council was the confirmation of the authority of certain metropolitan sees beyond their own provinces. The bishops of the council affirmed the authority of the metropolitan sees of Rome and Alexandria, recognizing their jurisdiction outside of their respective provinces. Additionally, the existing privileges of churches in Antioch and other provinces were also affirmed. These metropolitan sees were later designated as patriarchates and were given a specific order of precedence. Rome, as the capital of the empire, was of course in the first place, followed by Alexandria and Antioch. However, as the center of political power shifted to the Eastern Mediterranean, particularly to Constantinople, that grand city named after Constantine himself, the status and influence of Rome began to slowly drip away. With the elevation of the local bishop to the position of patriarch under Constantine, Constantinople, previously Byzantium and currently Istanbul, by the way, began to rise in prominence. The Bishop of Constantinople, known as Metrophanes, gradually freed himself from ecclesiastical dependency and obtained recognition as the second-ranking see after Rome. The elevation of Constantinople's status, described as New Rome, which I'm sure raised a few eyebrows back in actual Rome, and this raised it above the sees of Alexandria and Antioch, leading to ecclesiastical rivalry between Constantinople and Rome. Now this rivalry, along with Alexandria's objections to Constantinople's promotion, fueled a struggle between the two sees in the first half of the 5th century. You see how far this all goes back? Old grievances. Now, Rome, asserting its authority based on the theory of the three Petrine sees, with Rome in the first place, supported Alexandria's objections to Constantinople's elevation, and of course they would. However, after the Council of Chalcedon in the year 451, the position of Patriarchate of Alexandria was weakened due to a division within its Christian population, with the majority following a form of Christianity termed monophysitism. These developments sowed the seeds for the ecclesiastical rivalry between Constantinople and Rome, ultimately contributing to the schism between East and West in later centuries. Now, rewinding back a little bit, the Second Ecumenical Council, convened by Emperor Theodosius I in 381, marked another significant development in the ecclesiastical history of the Christian Church. The council elevated the See of Constantinople to a position ahead of the other major metropolitan sees, except for Rome. It also divided the Eastern Roman Empire into 5 separate dioceses, each managed by a synod of bishops, with special privileges granted to Alexandria and Antioch. Following this council, tensions arose between the bishoprics of Rome and Constantinople, particularly regarding their respective positions of authority within the Church. In 382, a synod in Rome under Pope Damasus I protested against the elevation of Constantinople and reaffirmed Rome's status as the Apostolic See. Successive popes, such as Cerularius, Innocent I, Boniface, and Celestine, asserted increasing authority for the See of Rome, claiming jurisdiction over major judicial cases and emphasizing the primacy of Rome in matters of ecclesiastical discipline. Now, Pope Leo I and his successors continued to assert Rome's authority, rejecting certain decisions of ecumenical councils such as the Council of Chalcedon. Remember that one? Well, the Akkadian Schism from 484 to 519 further highlighted the division between East and West, with Pope Hormosidas insisting on declarations affirming communion with the Apostolic See of Rome. Pope Gelasius I emphasized the distinction between the power of civil rulers and that of bishops, asserting the supreme authority of the Bishop of Rome in religious matters. Pope Nicholas I also reinforced the idea of papal supremacy, claiming authority over all churches on earth. These assertions of papal primacy only contributed to the growing tension between the East and West. The Fourth Ecumenical Council, held at Chalcedon in 451, further solidified the authority of the Patriarch of Constantinople within the Byzantine Empire. The council granted the Archbishop of Constantinople jurisdiction over the provinces of Pontus and Thrace, elevating its status among the patriarchates. Additionally, an agreement ratified between Antioch and Jerusalem established Jerusalem's jurisdiction over 3 provinces, placing it among the 5 great sees. The order of precedence among the patriarchs within the Byzantine Empire was established as follows: the Patriarch of Rome, the Patriarch of Constantinople, then Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem. While the Pope was considered first among equals, whatever that means, the authority of Constantinople was increasingly recognized, especially given its status as the imperial capital. Also, Constantinople was just generally the place to be. Alexandria was pretty good, but Rome, well, it was, let's just say, after all the barbarian invasions and massacres, it had somewhat lost some of its land value. Now, Pope Leo I, although his delegates were absent during the council, recognized its ecumenical status and confirmed its doctrinal decrees. However, he rejected Canon 28 of the council, arguing that it infringed upon the rights of Alexandria and Antioch and contradicted the sixth canon of Nicaea. Despite Rome's opposition, the influence of Constantinople as the residence of the emperor only continued to grow. Now, Canon 28, let's quickly just clear that up. Canon 28 of the Council was particularly contentious as it recognized Constantinople's authority over bishops in dioceses, quote, among the barbarians. Now, that could be interpreted in many ways. It also led to friction between the East and West, although the issue became irrelevant after the mutual excommunications of 1054. Nevertheless, debates persist regarding the applicability of this canon to the authority of the Patriarchate of Constantinople. And furthermore, Canon 9 of the Council conferred upon Constantinople the privilege of resolving disputes between bishops and the metropolitan of their province, further enhancing its own authority within the ecclesiastical hierarchy. Disunion within the Roman Empire significantly contributed to disunity within the Church. Emperor Diocletian's division of the administration of the eastern and western portions of the empire in the early 4th century all but set the stage for subsequent political fragmentation. While leaders like Constantine aimed to reunite the empire, somewhat naively, it remained divided, with Theodosius the Great being the last emperor to rule over a united Roman Empire. And following his death in 395, the empire permanently split into western and eastern halves, each under its own emperor. The sack of Rome in 410 by the Visigoths further isolated Rome from the churches in the eastern and southern Mediterranean. Full video on that if you're interested. Go and have a look in the, I think it's in the Roman history playlist, should be. Now, this isolation of Rome suited many of the patriarchs and bishops in those regions. The Western Roman Empire eventually collapsed in the 5th century, as it was overrun by Germanic tribes, and Odoacer, the bearded barbarian, declared himself king of all Italy in 476, and the Romans were all too dead to dispute it. Meanwhile, the Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantine Empire, continued to thrive, recovering territories in Western Mediterranean in the 6th century, before eventually losing them all again. Bad luck, I suppose. The collapse of civil government in the West left the Church with significant influence in many areas, with bishops often assuming secular administrative roles. Christianity in these regions became subject to the laws and customs of various Germanic peoples. Linguistic and cultural differences between the East and West further exacerbated these divisions. It was bad enough already without all of those linguistic faux pas. Latin was dominant in the West, while Greek prevailed in the East. The decline in individuals proficient in both languages made communication between the two halves of the Church increasingly difficult. That being said, if you were versed in both Latin and Greek, you could do very well for yourself. The linguistic and cultural divergence led to different approaches to religious doctrines and the development of distinctive rites. This growing divergence laid the groundwork for what would become the later schism, although it didn't occur until much later. Nevertheless, this is just another piece of the puzzle where the outlines of the schism were becoming discernible, as suspicion and mistrust between the East and West continued to deepen. And then things got even worse. The conquest of Muslim Arabs by 661 significantly impacted the territories of the patriarchates of Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem, which were only partially and temporarily recovered thereafter. Additionally, in 732, Emperor Leo III transferred territories including Sicily, Calabria, and Illyria from the jurisdiction of the Patriarchate of Rome to that of Constantinople, as a response to Pope Gregory III's opposition to the emperor's iconoclast policies. This transfer expanded the jurisdiction of the Patriarch of Constantinople to the west, aligning it practically with the Byzantines' borders. Now, time for another council. The Quinisext Council of 692 highlighted the divergence between the East and West, as the West outright rejected the Council's decisions. This rejection led to pressure from the Eastern Empire on the West to abandon certain Latin customs that by this time were deemed unorthodox. These customs including celebrating Mass on weekdays during Lent, fasting on Saturdays throughout the year, omitting the Alleluia during Lent, depicting Christ as a lamb, and using unleavened bread. The council also addressed disputes over celibacy for priests and deacons, affirming the right for married men to become priests, but forbidding priests to marry and bishops to live with their wives. Deposition was prescribed for anyone attempting to separate a clergyman from his wife. Now Pope Sergius I, although a loyal subject of the empire, rejected this council, stating his preference to, and I quote, die rather than consent to erroneous novelties. Now he certainly made his point clear. Well, after he did that, he refused to sign the canons, leading to Emperor Justinian II ordering his arrest and abduction to Constantinople. However, the attempt was thwarted by the militia of the Exarchate of Ravenna. The council was ratified in Visigothic Hispania by the 18th Council of Toledo under King Witiza's urging, although later reversed again by Fruela I of Asturias. The primary causes of the East-West Schism were rooted in these disputes over claims of jurisdiction, particularly concerning papal authorities and the insertion of the filioque clause in the Nicene Creed by the Western Patriarch in 1014. The seventh canon of the Council of Ephesus explicitly prohibited modification of the Nicene Creed, which was established by the First Ecumenical Council in 325. The Eastern Orthodox, argue that this canon prevented any modification of the creed by any individual or body, including ecumenical councils, by the way. Once it's there, it's there. The creed quoted in the Acts of the Council of Ephesus in 431 is that of the First Ecumenical Council of Nicaea, without the modifications made by the Second Ecumenical Council of Constantinople in 381, such as the addition of "who proceeds from the Father." This change was seen as addressing teachings outside of the Church, particularly the teachings of Macedonius I of Constantinople, without altering the original orthodoxy of the creed. Therefore, the word "different" in the seventh canon of the Council of Ephesus is understood to mean contradictory, rather than merely adding explanatory elements to the existing creed. Additionally, there were other catalysts for the schism, including variants over liturgical practices, although these were considered less significant compared to the disputes over papal authority and the Nicene Creed. Now, here's the big one. The major break between the churches of Rome and Constantinople occurred in 863 and lasted for several years due to a series of events surrounding the deposition of Patriarch Ignatius of Constantinople and his replacement by Patriarch Photios, enforced by Byzantine Emperor Michael III. In response to the deposition of Ignatius and the appointment of Photios, Pope Nicholas I held a synod at the Lateran in 863. This synod reverted the decisions made in 858, confirmed Ignatius as Patriarch, and anathemized Photios. However, this intervention by the Pope was viewed as unacceptable by the East, as it was seen as an intrusion into the process of election and confirmation of patriarchs in the ecclesial jurisdictions outside Rome's authority. Additionally, the Pope's attempt to remove Photios and reappoint Ignatius was seen as meddling in matters of imperial authority and the internal affairs of the Eastern churches, and they certainly did not appreciate that. Well, in response to the actions of Pope Nicholas I, Patriarch Photios convened a council in 867 at Constantinople. The council deposed Pope Nicholas I, condemned the teaching of the Filioque Clause, and excommunicated Nicholas. Pope Adrian II succeeded Nicholas after his death. However, the council's decisions were later annulled by the Constantinople Council in 869–70. Following the Council of Constantinople of 870, the Council of Constantinople in 880 restored the conclusions of the Council of 867. The Roman Catholic Church rejects the councils of 861, 67, and 880, but accepts the councils of 870. I know, it's so easy, right? Now, I'm going to skip forward a little bit. Leading up to 1054, relations between the papacy and the Byzantine court were relatively positive. Relatively. Emperor Constantine IX and Pope Leo IX were allied against pretty common enemies, particularly the Normans, who were imposing Latin customs in areas under their control, with papal approval, by the way. However, the defeat of the papal forces at the Battle of Civite in 1053, where Pope Leo IX was captured and imprisoned, strained relations between the papacy and the Byzantine court. The absence of the Lombard Catapran Argyrus, a key figure in the alliance between Pope Leo and Constantine, further exacerbated the rift. Meanwhile, Patriarch Michael I of Constantinople made it a habit of criticizing Western practices, such as the use of unleavened bread, which he deemed as Judaistic. The criticism was conveyed to Pope Leo IX by Humbert of Mormotiers, who then translated it into Latin and brought it to the Pope's attention. In response, Pope Leo sent a letter to the Patriarch Michael Cerularius, citing the donation of Constantine, a forgery that claimed papal primacy, which the Patriarch then rejected. The situation escalated when Humbert, along with other legates, arrived in Constantinople in the April of 1054 to address the ongoing disputes. However, their reception was hostile, and they stormed out of the palace, leaving behind a contentious letter for the Patriarch. The Patriarch refused to recognize their authority, and when Pope Leo IX died later that month, the legates continued to assert their authority despite the legal technicality of their mandate ending with the Pope's death. Well, the events leading up to the proper Great Schism in 1054 reached a climax when the papal legates, frustrated with Patriarch Michael of Constantinople's refusal to address the issues at hand, got together and decided to take drastic action. On July 16, 1054, they issued a charter of excommunication directed against Patriarch Michael, Archbishop Leo of Ohrid, and their followers. Well, this charter listed 11 accusations against Michael and his supporters, ranging from promoting eunuchs to the episcopacy, to refusing communion to women who were menstruating. The legates then entered the Hagia Sophia during divine liturgy and placed the charter on the altar, officially excommunicating those named. The Hagia Sophia is the main church, or rather, was the main church in Constantinople. It is now the main mosque in Istanbul. But they still kept up a lot of the decorations, so that was nice of them. Well, 2 days later, they left Constantinople, leaving behind a city on the brink of riot. Patriarch Michael, supported by the people, retaliated by holding a synod on July 20th, 1054, when he excommunicated the legates in return, hitting them with the Uno reverse card, it seems. The tension between the papal legates and the Byzantine authorities escalated further when the Patriarch had Argyrus's family arrested to appease the angry populace. Although an imperial envoy attempted to invite the legates back for further discussions, they failed to return and departed for Rome. In response, Patriarch Michael presided over the synod that formally anathemized the legates on July 24th, 1054, and burned copies of their charter while placing the original in the patriarchal archive. The events surrounding the Great Schism of 1054, particularly the actions of Cardinal Humbert and Patriarch Michael I, were marked by confrontations and mutual excommunications. However, these actions did not immediately lead to a complete and irreversible schism between the East and Western churches. Cardinal Humbert's choice as a papal legate was criticized, as both he and Patriarch Michael I were described as men of stiff and intransigent temper. Their initial encounter was unfriendly, and the Patriarch refused to engage further with the legates. Eventually, Cardinal Humbert simply lost patience and issued that charter of excommunication against Patriarch Michael. Well, it was more of a game of, oh yeah, well how about this? Each trying to outdo each other. Now, although these events are the ones that were often cited as the consummation of the schism in 1054, it's important to note that the schism was not finalized by these mutual excommunications. The charter of excommunication targeted only Patriarch Michael Cerularius, Archbishop Leo of Ochrid, and their adherents, without implying a general excommunication of the Byzantine Church. It was targeted more at individuals rather than the overall structure. And because of this, this dispute could have potentially been resolved without leading to a permanent schism, similar to the excommunication of any of the bishops that weren't towing the line or perhaps had too many of their own ideas. Well, the schism began to deepen when other Eastern patriarchs rallied behind Cerularius, a move bolstered by the support of Emperor Michael. However, some have questioned the validity of the charter, given that Pope Leo had passed away at the time, raising doubts about the legate's authority to issue such a document at all. Well, either way, the significance of the events in 1054 was not immediately recognized by many contemporary historians and church members. Despite the formal actions taken by leaders on both sides, ordinary Christians in the East and West remained blissfully unaware of any substantial change in their relations. Intercommunication between the two churches continued, and the perceived division between them was not yet fully realized. Imagine this. Something as, to me, comical. Correct me if I'm wrong, any very Orthodox Christians who are viewing this. But just imagine that if you had a friend and he was in Rome, you were in Constantinople, and you went to see him, you knock on the door, and he says, "I'm not letting you in." You say, "Why not?" And he says, "Because you make your bread differently to I." Don't you think that just sounds so ridiculous? I'm sure the problems were a little bit more deeper than that, but I would assume that the majority of people would see a lot of these issues as somewhat trivial. the bigger picture being a lot more important. If your friend is a Christian and you're a Christian too, then, well, just get along with each other. Well, I digress. Even in the years following 1054, friendly relations persisted, and the sense of separation between East and West was not deeply felt among the faithful. For example, in 1089, the Russian Church commemorated the translation of the relics of St. Nicholas of Myra to Italy, without any strong sense of division from the Western Church at all. The fluidity of the whole situation is reflected in differing interpretations of the geographical division between the East and West. Some areas, such as southern Italy, were interpreted differently in maps drawn up in the West, compared to those in regions where Eastern Orthodoxy predominated. Well, additionally, even in regions where rulers officially aligned with one church, there were instances of individuals and communities adhering to the other side. Efforts to reconcile the churches were made by both popes and patriarchs in the centuries following the events of 1054. However, various factors and historical developments over time only contributed to a widening of the separation between the East and Western churches. And you can certainly see it in so many aspects, how different the Eastern Orthodox Church is to the Catholic Church, and to the rather more, I call it, Americanized Christianity that we see in the United States. Everybody has their own beliefs, certainly. Well, thank you very much for listening. It's been a bit of a long video, so I appreciate your patience. I hope that you learned something. I know that I did. I'd like to thank my Mega Chad patron, that would be Stark Factory, making his glorious contribution, and I would like to thank you for listening so far, and thank you in advance for hitting the subscribe button. I'm almost at 3,000 subscribers. This to me is quite incredible, as only 2 or so months ago I had 0. Perhaps you're watching this video sometime in the far future, where I have 10,000, 100,000, or perhaps even 1,000,000. Deus Vult. Thank you very much, everyone. Good night, and I will see you in the next video.